Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, bringing you guys some more stories and breakdowns around the NFL and just football in general. Today I got 4 more topics to talk with you guys about regarding the most recent NFL free agency, the combine, and a bunch of other stuff. The first thing I wanted to talk about was Jason Kelce and his impending retirement. There were some rumors around it. There's some new stuff that kind of came out or that I wasn't aware about, and I wanted to bring that up with you guys. Later on in the show, I'll talk about the NFL Combine that's actually starting today and some of the times, information, and who's participating and who's not participating in it, and I'll give my thoughts on that. Later in the show, I'll talk about the NFL and the NFL Competition Committee possibly thinking about changing the kickoff format and just trying to change something about it because we don't see too many kickoffs in the NFL in general, and the NFL wants to do something about it, so there could be a potential switch in how they do that for next season. Before I wrap it all up with the final topic, the discussion on Russell Wilson and his latest comments that he made on the I Am Athlete podcast with former NFL receiver Brandon Marshall. Russell Wilson had some interesting things to say about his career and just his situation right now currently. I wanted to give my thoughts on that and kind of break down what he said to you guys in the last segment of this episode. But before I jump into the chip shot segment of today's episode, I wanted to please just remind you guys to use the tip and donations link with any of the questions that you may have during the show. It's the tip and donations link is running across the ticker below me, and if you're unable to read it and just listening to this episode, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. Again, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. This makes sure I'm able to see your question in the chat box here to my right, and I can read them on air, interact with you guys with any questions that you may have. It's also a big help for not only this show, but for the network, and we'd greatly appreciate it if you guys could do that whenever you get the chance during this episode. But saying that, I can jump into the first thing I wanted to talk about. The chip shot story of today's episode revolves around the Eagles, again, as I touched on them yesterday in yesterday's episode. Today, it's a bit more of a emotional topic, I guess, for Eagles and Eagles fans just in general, because it's around Jason Kelce, their longtime center. He's been the center for as long as I've been watching football, and he has a special place in a lot of hearts in Philadelphia because of the player that he is, the sort of attitude that he brings, and a lot of people are very fond of Jason Kelce. But regardless of that, he is in the latter years of his career. Before this season, there was already talks about him retiring and how much longer could he keep playing for the Eagles, still being that leader in the locker room and everything. And after last year, how it all ended with the poor end of the regular season and then the bad performance in the playoffs against the Buccaneers there on the road, where it was just sort of like a big culmination, I think, just watching the game of how, their season, what kind of team they were there towards the end, struggling on offense. Their defense wasn't able to hold up against really anybody down the stretch. They lost some pretty bad games against the Cardinals, the Giants, and just offensively, they just never seemed to be in a rhythm after the midway point of the season, and it all culminated in that last game there, like I mentioned. And obviously, without a doubt, because of the way it ended so quickly, there were going to be talks about Jason Kelce and, what his thoughts were after the game. I'm sure a lot of people saw it on any social media that Adam Schefter actually reported after the game, after the loss, that Jason Kelce had communicated it with the rest of his team. He let his teammates know and, everybody else after the game that he was planning on retiring. It wasn't official. He didn't officially say it to everybody, but Schefter reported that was the sentiment. That was sort of the way it was heading after the game because of, it was just an ugly loss and everything was down and everything like that. And, they asked Kelce about it recently in a recent interview with I actually don't remember who it was with. On the Superfly podcast recently, where he was interviewed, and they asked him about it. Still, so many months removed from when they lost, and just a few weeks, almost a month now from the Super Bowl. They asked Kelce again, any updates on your retirement? To which he said, "I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out right now. Right now, exploring different opportunities. If I end up retiring, different opportunities if I end up retiring." He said that on the Superfly podcast, and that was according to Brian Fonseca of the New York Post. So he mentioned that, and then he later goes on to say that he's still working out and he's still staying in shape if he ends up playing again this coming season. And, with Kelce, I talked about it a few episodes ago because, of his brother Travis Kelce obviously being in the Super Bowl and everything. Everybody sees Jason Kelce on the sidelines, happy, just as a supporting role, really enjoying himself a lot, watching his brother, just spending time with everybody that he cares about. And in that environment, his fellow teammate, Jordan Mailata, said that he doesn't expect him to come back just because of how much fun he's having. And, he said it in a joking way, but I almost took it as, that's a fair point. Even if it's a joke or not, I thought it was pretty fair because, after a certain point, I wouldn't know because I never played football. I never was in that profession. I would assume that after just a certain point you get with Jason Kelce or anybody, that you start to enjoy the offseason a bit more. It's almost like over the years it starts turning into this greater appreciation of the offseason, almost like a relief that like finally, I'm done with football. I have some good time off to myself, rather than I think at the beginning of the season where you see some of these other younger guys in the playoffs, like C.J. Stroud or something like that comes to my mind, where they head into the off season and then you hear them say, that they'll take a week or two off and then they're going to get right back into it. They can't wait to start playing again. Whereas with Jason Kelce now, I think he's pondering it more, the possibility of playing against next season. He doesn't really want to think about next season too much compared to these other guys. And I think that's just a natural transition of it with any player. I'm sure most players could feel like that when they head into their older years. But that's kind of what connects the sentiment I got with Jordan Mailata saying that, and just Jason Kelce's actions off the field during the offseason. He's been very active, more than I've ever seen him, with just appearing in the Pro Bowls with his kids, his family, at the games, like I mentioned, on various different podcasts. He was on Shaq's podcast, hosting his own podcast, and then just doing a lot more with this media stuff off the field. And that brings me to my second point, which was Michael McCarthy from Front Office Sports reported earlier this month that Kelce actually met with Fox and ESPN to discuss a potential post-playing career in TV. And, later on McCarthy clarified that, these talks were preliminary. They're just the very first initial steps to to what could be if Kelce wants to. He could end up not going that route. He has his very successful podcast that he has with Travis, but that was just a report that Michael McCarthy stated that he wanted to throw out there, and for a lot of people that does make sense, like I mentioned, because he's already been in the media space. He's very successful at it because of the personality that you get to know. A lot of people have gotten to know Jason Kelce now as the person through his podcast, through everything you see on social media, that it does make sense. And if Kelce wants to do it, I think it'd be a great opportunity for him. But it all just wraps up into this idea about Jason Kelce that even though he hasn't said it, a lot of people are starting to believe that it could be true. But in the same breath, I think he could play a few more years if he wanted to, maybe at least one more year. I think I'd give him, because he is, I want to say, 35 years old from when I researched the information, and he's part of that group, the Brandon Grahams, the Fletcher Cox, the Lane Johnsons of the world, part of that Eagles organization where I think they would all love to go out together, but Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham are unrestricted free agents, so maybe the Eagles sign a one-year deal with those two, get Kelce to come back, and they all ride off together, maybe except Lane Johnson because he's still 33, but those three, Graham, Cox, and Kelce, could all do one more year together, and I think it would be a big help for the Eagles because of what I mentioned yesterday with a potential lack of maturity being there in leadership with Sirianni and the coaching staff. I think having those guys for one more year would make the transition easier to, transition it to Jalen Hurts per se, or an A.J. Brown too, who also says he views himself as a leader, holding guys accountable. I think having one more year with Cox, Kelce, and Graham would help that transition become a lot smoother for those guys to take over. And if they were to just drop it now, I think it would be very tricky because of the relationship Kelce has with Hurts. I'm not sure if they're looking at center right now because, Jason Kelce's still in a maybe phase. So if he were to just drop it and retire, I think it could be, he might not want to add that other obstacle to jump over for the Eagles to have to deal with. So it's all still at a maybe, but I thought it was interesting, just those comments. I didn't even know he was having talks about a potential deal with TV and stuff like that, but it does make sense, and I wanted to bring it up to you guys here and give you guys my thoughts on Jason Kelce, because it's a foregone conclusion, but I'm sure it wouldn't surprise anybody that he came back and they all sort of rolled off into the sunset as that core three that the Eagles have had a lot of success with over the past few seasons. But that's, the past. Leading up into the future now, a big step into the future is the NFL Combine, and the NFL Combine officially started today. I'm gonna talk about who's gonna be at the Combine, who's not, which athletes are participating, and just breaking up all the skill positions, all the practices and stuff like that in a few minutes. But I'm gonna send it to a quick break right now, and on the other side of that, I'll bring you the Combine and more information on the breakdown of the schedule and everything like that. So don't go anywhere. That's coming up next.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to bring you guys the following segment on the NFL Combine. If you were unable to catch that first segment, I just brought up the topic about Jason Kelce and his still pending retirement, what my thoughts were, some interesting quotes that came out about what he could be doing in his post-playing career. And if you missed that, you could always check it out afterwards on the GSMC Podcast Network channel or the Sports Network channel to just catch up on the individual segments if you couldn't catch that one. But saying that, I will be moving on to the NFL Combine. It officially started today with coaches, executives, teams all going down there, meeting up in Indianapolis and getting this whole process started with the Combine and, all the drama, all the news that breaks, all the rumors that just get produced from everybody in the footballing world kind of culminating at this spot in Indianapolis. And there will be more than 300 athletes there working out, interviewing, going through medicals. Today specifically, there was a lot of interviews going on with coaches and executives. The most popular guys at the Indianapolis Stadium, the Indianapolis Colts Stadium, were Brian Pools, the general manager for the Bears. There were conversations had with general manager Brett Veach on Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed, as well as some of the new guys like Mike McDonald, the new head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, and other guys as well, Dan Quinn and stuff like that. There was some news that broke today that I wanted to bring up a little bit. The Falcons released Jonnu Smith today officially. There was also the news that the Chiefs were actually going to tag were trending in the direction of tagging their star cornerback free agent, L'Jarius Sneed. It's not official yet. The team hasn't officially said it, but a lot of reports have said it's trending in that direction. One report even said it was almost 70 to 80% there with that transaction going on. But the biggest part of that was that they most likely will tag him, but in the same breath, they are willing to trade him if they can't work out a long-term deal with him and obviously Chris Jones. If the money's not there, they are willing to trade L'Jarius Sneed if they have to, which I think would be fair because they're doing right by L'Jarius Sneed. If in any case, if he can't get the money that he deserves or he thinks that he deserves, he can try and get it elsewhere and start somewhere else fresh. So that was the biggest stories today. The workouts at the Combine don't actually start until this coming Thursday in a few days, with the defensive linemen and the linebackers starting on Thursday. The defensive backs and the tight ends will go on Friday, and the quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs will all start on Saturday at 1 p.m. before it all ends and it all wraps up with the offensive linemen doing their drills and their training and tests and everything on Sunday. If you're interested in catching the coverage of the Combine, I know a lot of people are interested to see what these guys kind of look like after a few months off training, getting ready for the Combine. There will be coverage on NFL Network and ESPN from the first day of the event all the way through. And in saying that, I know a lot is made from, the test numbers, the highlights you get from some of these guys at the Combine, some prospects that are very highly touted. A lot of them, or maybe some of the biggest ones, aren't going to be there, or they're going to be there, but they're not going to be testing, which is a shame for the fans that want to see them, see how they're looking, what's the update on them, do they post any freakish times that will make headlines everywhere, raise their stocks. A lot of times you get these guys that are very highly touted, very likely to go in the top picks of the first round, don't usually participate in the drills. Some of them not testing at the Combine are wide receiver Marvin Harrison, Caleb Williams, the quarterback from USC, Jaden Daniels, are some of the bigger names that aren't testing at the Combine. I also remember seeing Malik Neighbors. He won't be testing. But some of them, like Marvin Harrison, aren't expected to do any testing at the combine, but will be there for the interviews, the media side of things as well. Same with Caleb Williams. Won't be testing at the combine, but will be there for meetings and interviews. Same could go for Jaden Daniels. On the other side of that, J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, all plan to throw at the combine, and as well as Rome Odunze from Washington. He also plans to test for the wide receivers at the combine, and I think that makes sense. And I think one thing that kind of sticks out to me when I'm thinking about this, Odunze, Malik Neighbors, and Marvin Harrison are probably the top 3 receivers on anybody's draft board, and with Marvin Harrison not testing, Malik Neighbors not testing, it makes sense. It's logically reasonable to do that because, Marvin Harrison in every mock draft has been drafted inside the top 5. So, if everyone already thinks that, everyone already has him there, what does he have left to prove? How much more can he raise his stock? That kind of makes sense for me, but on the other side, with Malik Neighbors also not testing, it kind of brings me to my point where you get Rome Odunze testing, and he's highly touted as well. He's very talented, had a great performance in the playoffs, and just really the whole regular season for Washington, that when I'm comparing them, if I'm a general manager and I see Odunze testing at the combine and then I don't see these other 2 guys at the combine, just my recency bias will have Odunze, at least for me, raised almost above Malik Neighbors. Maybe not Marvin Harrison if you don't want to go that far, but just based on recency bias, and if he tests really well, posts some crazy numbers that a lot of people weren't expecting and maybe just surprises a lot of people, I think that will just be fresh in everybody's head. And at that point, it's almost like he's taking advantage of this opportunity. Not that he has to, because a lot of people still have him in the top half of the first round for the draft coming up in late April, that he could raise his stock ahead of those guys, and then that only benefits him. It might hinder Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors a tad. They might drop below him, but you never know when it comes to the draft. All these little things that might not seem important, it might seem logical for Harrison, Caleb Williams, Malik Neighbors not to test, but some of these little things, at least they're going to be at the combine, but some of these other little things do make a difference, I believe, in some general managers' minds and some executives, some coaches, because you always see these big surprises at the draft, and everyone's always left wondering, how did this guy go above this guy? How did Mac Jones fall all the way to 15? How did Baker go number 1 overall? Stuff like that. How did Tua go ahead of Joe Burrow or actually not Joe Burrow, but how did just those kind of scenarios? Everyone always wonders how those sort of things happen. I believe it kind of leads back to some of these little actions that people might not think of, but do instead make a big impact on some of these coaches and people making these decisions, that it makes sense for Marvin Harrison and Neighbors not to test, but they'll get another opportunity to do it at their pro day and things like that. Caleb Williams' pro day set for March 20th, and Jaden Daniels, who's also not testing, his pro day will be March 27th. So they're going to have to wait a little longer, and a lot could happen in that time. You do unfortunately see some players getting injured, and then, it throws everything off. So if something like that were to happen, God forbid it does, you miss this chance at the combine to show what you have, and then, it throws everybody in a whirlwind. They don't know where to stand on these guys. But, that's kind of where I stand on it. For these other guys like J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, it's different because even though they had great seasons, J.J. McCarthy won the national championship. Bo Nix had a great year with Oregon, was in a lot of great games, had some great individual performances in those games. Same with Michael Penix, made it to the final, but ultimately lost. I think they all had great showings in those, but it's still a question about, the level that you showed at college and then the level that you show in the NFL. There's a lot of questions around maybe J.J. McCarthy's arm strength, his ability in the NFL. He's not the biggest of guys, and people will still want to see how he tests. That was a very talented Michigan team. He had a lot of offensive weapons, Blake Corum, Roman Wilson, just to name a few of those guys. Had a great O-line as well. It comes to a lot of people's attention that they want to see how he just tests on his own, maybe throwing to a different receiver in the combine and getting that timing down right away. How sharp his arm is, the accuracy. When everybody's watching, it gets kind of, if you do watch the event, it gets pretty quiet and just, they're in the stadium by themselves. There's not a lot of people there, and it gets very eerily quiet. And, I think if I went there, I think that might get to me a little bit, just how everybody's looking at you. You can hear probably everything whenever anybody makes a noise. Those sort of things, people just want to see where they're at. Obviously, with the interviews and the meetings, stuff like that, people want to get a good gauge of where these players stand at because, teams gamble a lot on these players, and everything comes into account at this time of the year. Obviously, with the combine, with everybody being there, the trade rumors are always going to be there. It's a good place for trades to go down. Last year, it was where the Bears made the trade with the Panthers at that number 1 overall pick, where they got DJ Moore back, and the Panthers got the number 1 pick, received Bryce Young, and, the rest is history. Nothing has gone down yet. They've asked the general manager of the Bears, Ryan Poles, a lot about Justin Fields and stuff like that, but, he kind of said it jokingly that he has no groundbreaking news to drop today on everybody, so he sort of apologized for that sarcastically, and I'm sure they're going to ask him a lot more about it going forward. It's a big topic, and I'm sure a lot of people will want to know and ask him what he thinks on all these other quarterbacks and stuff like that. Ask the quarterbacks what they think on these teams, but nothing on that end so far. One last nugget here before I wrap up this segment. There were a lot of coaches that I found out were not attending the combine in the time I was researching this topic, and some of those guys included some pretty big names: Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Mike McCarthy, Robert Saleh might show up later in the week. He said a maybe, and Kyle Shanahan will all not be there. I just thought it was interesting because I saw Mike McCarthy wasn't going to be there, and I thought, okay, that's maybe one of 2 coaches. But when I saw the entire list, I thought it was pretty surprising, just because, like I mentioned, it's a great opportunity to go get to know these players, and a lot of them tune in for meetings and stuff like that, and it's all virtual now. If you want to meet with these guys, interview them, have the media availability, they could do it virtually now. They don't have to go there and be there. But it is interesting because a lot of these guys, the Rams, the Packers, the Cowboys, the Jets, the 49ers, aren't picking high enough where some of these guys might be available. And even the biggest guys available, the highest touted prospects, aren't going to be testing. So you kind of see that from that point of view, but other than that, I think at least I wouldn't want to miss an opportunity to get to know or talk to in person some of the other guys, the later round guys that might not get the headlines, but could be a huge pick in the later rounds of the draft, 3rd, 4th round. I think it's a good opportunity to do that, get to know them. But, one thing I saw that was brought up on this topic, just to close it out, was that they are in Indianapolis. They are these high-profile people now. If you're the head coach of an NFL football team, they are like celebrities. So a lot of people will come up to them, and there is that hassle of getting to and from the stadium each day, being there the entire time. It's a lot. If you're trying to relax away from football in the downtime, it's hard with people just constantly going up to you. Some coaches don't want to deal with that, and that's completely fair. I just thought it was a interesting thing to bring up here, something that I didn't really know the amount of coaches missing out on this. But I'll put a pin on that. I'm sure I'll talk about more about the combine in these next few days, but it is just kicking off, and it is just the excitement is building around that, and the just attention to the combine is building, as well as the attention on Russell Wilson and his comments that he made on a podcast about his future and potentially winning a few more Lombardis just casually for Russell Wilson. All that and more. After I send it to a quick break, I'll break down exactly what he said and why he feels so strongly about that, and why it could be possible with some teams, why I think he might be crazy. All that and more coming up after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, I mentioned that Russell Wilson story. We will get to that in a very few minutes. The last thing I wanted to bring up before that topic was a potential rule change coming to the NFL in the form of the kickoff model. The situation around kickoffs hasn't been the greatest because of the new rules that have been implemented, the narrative around kickoffs being dangerous. There's a lot of high-speed, high-profile athletes, a lot of just people running around at high speeds that it's obviously not going to end up in a lot of safety being considered for a lot of these guys trying to tackle the returner or trying to set a block. Blindside blocks have become a huge thing. Concussions are a massive thing that the NFL are trying to cut down on. And the NFL, I think, kind of went too far in one direction with it. Now they implemented the fair catch rule that if it didn't go back into the end zone for a touchback, you can kind of wave your hand like it's a fair catch, and you start at the 25-yard line regardless. And, it's just given a lot of these returners, a lot of these teams just that freebie. We're going to take it, our chances at starting at the 25 anyway. Most kickers kick a touchback anyway for the start of the game. So the chances of you getting a kickoff to start the game or at any point during the game, it's very unlikely already. And then just implement that fair catch rule. I think it's really taken this whole rule and the kickoff situation in one direction, too far in one direction. And now the NFL kind of wants to reel it back, and they want to get a little bit more excitement back into that part of the game. The NFL owners are able to vote on this proposal. It's become a bit more popular over the last coming days with the competition committee meeting over it. They actually met this past weekend, and this was something that they brought up. And it's starting to gain a little bit of traction among, the owners who could vote on it and stuff like that. One thing that they are really considering is using the XFL's kickoff model a lot. That was also mentioned in the competition committee's meeting over this past weekend. And, that's something different that they can bring in. It's been mentioned before how the NFL could try implementing some of these things from other forms of football that we see. Other forms of football aren't traditional, aren't what the common fan wants to see, but they do show they do bring some excitement and something different to the game of football in general that I think a lot of fans would like it to arrive in the NFL. But at the same time, the biggest thing with the NFL is that they want to reduce the concussions. They want to keep player safety as the main priority. And if they could do that and still change the kickoff rule with implementing something from the XFL, they would be open to it. And if you're unaware of it, with the kickoffs, like I mentioned, they've gone too far in one direction of just overprotecting the players and just almost taking away the kickoff almost completely from the games. If you weren't aware, 22% of the kickoffs, only 22% of the kickoffs were returned just last year. There was no kickoff returns in the Super Bowl. There was 13 kickoffs, but none of them were returned at all during the Super Bowl. And, CBS reported after that the committee talked about it a lot more yesterday, or actually Sunday, and they're going to bring it up again at the owners' meeting in March and get a proposal vote on it. To get it to change, I am almost sure they're going to need 24 out of the 32 owners to vote in favor of it. But, that's a good amount of the owners to vote on it, and I think there has to be a good proposal to do that in a way. Even the vice president of football operations mentioned it just today or recently that Troy Vincent, that is, the vice president of football operations, he says that his sentiment, he's in a place where he doesn't want the kickoff just to be a sort of ceremonial type of thing. Just if you see the kickoff, that all that means is it's the start of the game or somebody scored. He doesn't want that, and no fan wants to just see the kickoff get taken away quickly or just completely, I should say, because of that excitement that it brings. Obviously, if you see someone dashing through so many bodies and just returning one, they get into an open field, and just from that big clutter, you see them escape from all of that. It creates a lot of excitement, a big reason why the NFL is what it is, and a lot of moments have come from kickoffs, a lot of famous moments in playoff games, in Super Bowls. It just changes the dynamic of so many parts of the game that, I think trying to bring that back, trying to incorporate that is something that the NFL should really consider. I know a lot of the times when they vote on these changes to the rules, it's said that they always just say it's gaining traction, it could be a possibility, but they never actually do anything about it. And if they do, it's nothing too extreme. They might change one thing about it, and it's almost basically the same. But I hope that this is one aspect or one rule that they really take into account, that it is an important part of the game for anybody to switch momentum, to get the momentum back on their side, because momentum is a real thing, and it's something so vital that could change games and just make them that much greater if kickoffs kind of return to what they were. I mentioned that XFL model. If you're not aware of the XFL model, what they do in the XFL anytime there's a kickoff, compared to the NFL, the XFL actually has the kickers line up at their own 30-yard line. It's the only difference there is the NFL kickers now line up at their own 35. It's 5 yards back for the XFL. And they actually have 10 other players on the kickoff team lining up with them, but they line up at the opponent's 35-yard line, 5 yards away from the returning team that lines up at the 30. And what's interesting, what I think really makes the most sense here, is that the kicker and the returner are the only players at the time that can move until the ball is fielded by the returner, or it's caught or it's scooped up by the returner. Nobody else is allowed to move other than the kicker and the returner. And then the benefit of that is that you already have the returning team on that side, so you don't have a guy sprinting full speed 20 to 30 yards already before he gets even close to the returner. And if he's able to make a great hit on him, it's that much more dangerous for the returner or somebody that's not paying attention on the blocking team, the return team, I should say, and they're not blindsided by a guy just running. The high-speed collisions are reduced a lot just from my understanding of the rule. And I think it would be kind of funny if you saw only two guys moving on the kickoff, the returner and the kicker, at least for a few seconds. It would be a little bit unorthodox, and it would be just another aspect of this that would be a lot more interesting to watch. A lot more people would tune in or want to see what this is about, and I think a lot of people would like it in all honesty, because If nobody does field it, or if the play isn't blown dead, like a fair catch or something like that, like a touchback, the returning team starts at the 35-yard line. So, you still you do push them back, or you do push them forward a lot more than the NFL does. A touchback is at the 25, obviously, so it almost makes it easier for the offense anyway. That's the only thing I would change about this rule. I'd probably start them at the 30 if you had to move them up. But, I don't hate that idea. You could even put it at the 25-yard line regardless. But I think putting it at the 30 or the 25-yard line would be best to make this the kind of model that I would be very interested in seeing. The NFL, like I mentioned, they line up at their own 35-yard line, but that's the entire team. The entire team of only 8 returners on the other team, they line up within 15 yards of the kicking team. And, all the kicking team is lined up on their own 35, and then they kick it off. And you're not allowed to double team block. The touchbacks, like I mentioned, go back to the 25-yard line. So that's another thing that could change with the double team blocks. If you have the players already so close to each other and the distance is not very much between the returner and the kicking team anyway, you can implement those double team blocks because it's not, like I mentioned, they're not running full speed already. They're not colliding down the field a lot more before they get to the returner. You could change those aspects of it that way, or I don't know, just thinking about it, you could have less returners, or you can have more returners than just 8 from the NFL model, because they only have 8 members of the return team out there with the kicker. So I don't know, you could implement more. You could have more out there, do 10 on 10, or do less if you want, to be a lot more offensive. But that's all the other details and the other nuances that they have to work out with the competition committee, the owners. They brought it up, I think, in October, but now it's a time, really in the offseason, where they hone in on this stuff, really change some rules. And I'm looking forward to what they decide on it. I think it's a very interesting topic because not a lot of people think of the kickoff as being important. A lot of people, quite frankly, I think, are starting to not forget about it, but not really take into account how massive it is not having these guys return it and not giving their team a chance really to get... It's really there to give your team the advantage if you're able to execute it right. Your special teams is on point. You're able to get 10, 15 more yards of where you would if you just accept the touchback. I think they've taken that out of it just because it's too dangerous, and they're taking the advantage away from the offense, but they're giving it back to them with all the penalties and stuff they handicap the defense with. But that's another topic for a different day if you want to go into the defensive side and how they're not really given a chance a lot of times with the offensive calls. But I'll leave it at that. But that's where the NFL is with the potential changes to the kickoff model. It's a very interesting thing that if it does change, I'll definitely bring it up again and mention it to you guys if that rule does go into fruition. But we have arrived at the last break of this episode. I mentioned that Russell Wilson story that I wanted to talk about. That is coming up next. What he said to Brandon Marshall, what it means for the Denver Broncos, what it means for Russell Wilson. Is it realistic? Maybe not. I'll give you my thoughts, and then you guys, I would love to know your thoughts after the episode's done in the comments or just anywhere to engage with it. But I'll bring that topic up right after this break. More on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast up next. back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Back here for one last time to talk about the last discussion I wanted to bring up on the show. And it's a very interesting one, again, around these quarterbacks that have just taken over the whole offseason with what they say, with what they post, or just anything said about them. It always gains headlines. This time, I'll focus in on Russell Wilson. But before I do that, I wanted to remind you guys one last time, if you have any questions at all during this episode, that to please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker below me. With those questions, I'm able to read your question online, and it makes it easier for them to just pop up here with the tip and donations link. And if you're unable to see the tip and donations link, it's streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. Again, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. It's a big help for this show, the other shows on the network, and again, it's a big appreciation from us if you guys are able to do that with any questions that you may have that may pop up during this episode. Lastly, the discussion of today's episode is Russell Wilson. What did he say on the I Am Athlete podcast hosted by Brandon Marshall? The I Am Athlete podcast is very very controversial. It's not like a hot take of mine or anything. I do watch the show sometimes, but a lot of good, interesting quotes come out of that podcast, and it's very good for the media and stuff like that to gain traction like that. But this quote from Russell Wilson, he was on the show recently as their most recent guest, and he definitely didn't disappoint with what he said and the reactions it garnered after he said it. One of the biggest things that he said was on his career going forward, what he aspires to do still after a rough period in Denver these last 2 years with Nathaniel Hackett, how bad that season was, and then Sean Payton coming in, improving it a little bit, but kind of fell out of love with Russell Wilson. They had some spats on the sideline. You kind of saw Sean Payton, yelling at him a lot at times on the sidelines, and then there was that whole incident where they had that big win, I want to say over the Chiefs, and there was that report that came out that the Broncos told Russ to lower his injury guaranteed portion of his contract, the money he gets in case he were injured, to lower it, restructure his deal, or else he was going to get benched. And obviously he didn't, and he did get benched for the last part of the season, those last games. And, a lot of people, as I believe, think that was the last straw with this relationship. There's no way you can go back to Russell Wilson after you have that interaction with him, if you're Sean Payton or the organization. That sort of conversation, other than being extremely awkward, I'm sure would not sit well with anybody, and the expectation is that Russell Wilson moves on now, and the other expectation is for him to, get cut. I don't think a lot of teams will be banging down the door of the Broncos to try to get their hands on Russ, so he's most likely out of there. And going to this quote that he said on his career aspirations, he says, "I've got more fire than ever, honestly, especially over the past 2 years of what I've gone through, whether it's in Denver or somewhere else. I hope it's Denver. I hope I get to finish there. I committed there. I want to be there. I want to be there, and I wanted to be there." Later on, he says, "You also want to be in a place that also wants you too." And those quotes already, nothing too crazy from that part of it. He's supposed to say that. He's supposed to say he's more motivated than ever, that he can't wait to get out there. But what did catch everyone else's attention was the part where he says, "For me, it's about winning. Over the next 5 years, I want to win too. I want to win. I want to feel the chill of that trophy again." Referring to the Lombardi Trophy, winning 2 more Super Bowls over the next 5 years. And a lot of people were bashing down on Russell Wilson for saying that. poking fun of him, making fun of saying something like that. I've seen clips on ESPN. I've tuned into the show on that and other networks that, they say that and they immediately go to what he's able to what he has been producing with the Broncos. Saying things like, how could he say that after the season that he's had, the fall off that he's had ever since leaving Seattle. Is it realistic? Maybe if he falls into the right situation with the right support around him, the right coaching staff. But I think at this point, for him to jump into a scenario so perfectly and be the starter right away, that part of it seems realistic for me on my end, because I don't think there's a team out there right now that's a Super Bowl caliber team that needs a quarterback. I don't think there's anybody out there like that. The teams that compete for Super Bowls now are the teams that have that established guy, that extremely talented young guy, or that veteran guy that's been there, done that before. Those are the teams that are the Super Bowl caliber teams, and it's very unlikely. It's wishful thinking, if you want to classify it as that, for me, that Russell Wilson just joins the team and immediately he's in contention to win a Super Bowl. I don't see it like that, but I think he could have success again. I'm not one of these people that think he's done. He can't produce it again. You have to remember that Russell Wilson he was one of these guys that people will say all the time that he had a Hall of Fame career. He was on that trajectory to being one of those guys after his first few years in the league with the Seattle Seahawks, the Legion of Boom era. He came in, he created these magical plays that everyone saw now, from a Patrick Mahomes, a Lamar Jackson, a Kyler Murray, for a guy that's almost the same stature of Russ. He was the guy that did it before all of them, earlier in my years, before a few years back, and now his trajectory has kind of gone, from going up to kind of plateauing a little bit. Yeah, you could give him one bad year with Nathaniel Hackett, and then it's kind of fallen down from there. And a lot of people have almost written him off after that, but it's hard for me to say that talent, that that wherewithal, that ability to create magic is completely gone, because you could lose it for a little bit. The situation you're in might not require you to do that, but I think if he's put in the right situation, he could produce something like that. Maybe not at the same speed, and it might not look the same, but that's just because he is older. He might have to switch his play style a little bit, but I just don't think he has just, kind of forgotten how to do that, has forgotten how to read a defense, pick out the right throws, make the right reads, and if it's not there, just take the sack, and move on. For me, he's still able to do that. He's not that old. I don't know exactly how old he is. I know he's in his 30s. I want to say probably like 33-ish, around there for Russell Wilson. And, I think at times with the Broncos, if you saw, and if you tuned in, a lot of times, at least in the first year, he tried to do too much with it. He tried to still run around the backfield and buy time and then just chuck it up somewhere or try to fit it into a tight window. That sort of thing, I could agree that doesn't fit with him anymore because he is getting older. But I think at times he made some good throws. He's still able to throw a beautiful deep ball to receivers if he has them. I'm not saying that the Broncos receivers are nobodies, that they have nobody. Cortland Sutton had a great year. Jerry Jeudy had his ups and downs, but they still have a decently talented offense that Russell Wilson, I think, just at times has that bad habit of trying to do too much, and that gets him in trouble a lot of times, and that's not the kind of system that would fit with a Sean Payton, a very disciplined kind of coach. Could get in your face if you don't, follow the style, the schematics, the reads that he expects you to. I don't think that style fits with Sean Payton, and I think maybe if he goes somewhere else, he's going to have to start off from the bottom just because of his recent reputation. He's going to have to be a backup somewhere, in my opinion, unless, I don't know if he's going to the Raiders or something like that. He's been rumored with the Steelers, but the Steelers have a guy in Kenny Pickett that they say is their quarterback one, so he's going to be a backup there, most likely, at least to start. And then with the Raiders, yeah, is he better than Aiden O'Connell? Probably, most likely, but just in recent times, it could be put up to question because, Aiden O'Connell showed you something. Does he show you at least the same thing that Russell Wilson would if he plays to the level that he has been playing? That could be a bit more of a competition, but I still think there's something out there for him, and for him to say what he did on the I Am Athlete podcast, it was a way to stir things up. He's very confident, and that's something you want to see if you are trying to advocate for Russell Wilson. If you're one of these teams that is window shopping a little bit, sees Russell Wilson, are unsure of him, if he says something like that and you buy it, you can trust him on that part. Yeah, it's great for him to say that, but a lot of teams, a lot of people have kind of just brushed it aside and made it something to kind of poke fun of him for. But I didn't see too much wrong with it. I thought it caught me off guard, definitely, but it's once you think about it, dive deeper into it like I tried to do here right now, I don't think it's too far out of the realm to think he can give you something at least and make you a bit better with his quarterback play than a lot of these teams have at the options currently on their team. But that's still yet to be seen. I expect the Broncos to release him. Like I mentioned before, I don't think anyone's trading him, or the Broncos aren't going to try and hold on to him much longer. I think it's only a matter of days. Sean Payton actually said they're going to meet the Broncos, all the executives, the team decision makers are going to meet, and they're going to decide what to do with him. Most likely they're going to have a decision in the next couple of weeks is what he said. So, after the combine, before the new league year starts, I expect him to be cut, and then this whole thing is really going to start to pick up with Russell Wilson and around the teams that are still vying for a quarterback, the Steelers, the Raiders, the Vikings, the Buccaneers, the Patriots, all these teams I think could definitely benefit from Russell Wilson, but he's going to have to earn it. That's definitely for sure. But that's all the time I have for you guys today. I thought that was interesting part of a news story that I wanted to bring up here and just discuss it a little bit. I always say I want to know what you guys think on this last segment of the show. What do you guys think on Russell Wilson? Where do you guys think he'll end up? And where do you think he fits best? Does he fit best as a backup, or do some of you guys really think he could start unquestionably on some of these teams? But as always, I want to give a huge thanks to everyone listening or who watches afterwards as well. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of this network's content. If you want to see more of me and you really like this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for more of the live shows. There's YouTube Shorts on there, and there's individual segment videos if you couldn't catch the full live episode as well. And, as always, I've been your host, Manny Maradiege. Tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football coverage that have made news and have been relevant recently. As always, take care, and I'll see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.